Hello everyone, I'm Reena Mittal, Managing Editor, Textile Excellence Magazine. Welcome to this discussion on re-energizing the textile and apparel industry, brought to you by Textile Excellence in collaboration with PricewaterhouseCoopers Private Limited. After a long lockdown, the industry has restarted, capacity utilization is improving, workers are returning to the factories. However, there is a perceptible shift in the traditional supply chains. How will this impact the South Asian textile and apparel industry? And how can the industry mitigate the risk of trade shifts? Our esteemed panelists will try to answer these questions in our first episode on reorientation of global textile and apparel supply chains. I take this opportunity to introduce Sabine, our keynote speaker today. Sabine leads the International Finance Corporation's global team for manufacturing investments and supplier finance.
I would like to upload a presentation, so just bear with me. I think I'm almost there. So let me see if it works. Here we are. So I share this presentation with you. It's a presentation that I put together from many different sources that we have at the World Bank Group. I just want to introduce very quickly of what I would like to talk about. I think being from the International Finance Corporation, I need to give a bit of what we're doing and how we're getting involved in the value chain. But I want to focus specifically on what is changing in global supply chains and then go into the future of supply chains, focusing specifically on RMG and South Asia as we're discussing this. So IFC is part of the World Bank Group, which has 5 organizations. IFC is the organization that deals with the private sector. We are a global institution. We are a development institution with the twin goals of ending poverty and boosting shared prosperity. We have a long history. We have a lot of private sector clients, more than 2,000. We have presence in more than 100 countries, and we're working with 900 financial institutions. So we have our tools at hand in which we're working with our clients, our investment and advisory services, and just to give a very quick overview of the tools, which are fairly broad, from loans through mezzanine and equity to mobilizing capital from third parties, short-term finance, trade finance, derivative and structured finance, and blended finance. The latter is where we are raising funding for the poorest countries with some sort of public sector support to overcome increasing risks that we see in poor countries, in the poorest of countries. So on the advisory service, I don't want to spend too much time, but this is a very important part of what we're doing. And I think specifically in the garment sector, we had some really interesting interventions, mainly relating to sustainability, both on the environmental and energy efficiency, resource efficiency side, but also on gender as well as on labor conditions. We're working together with ILO on better work. So we have quite an insight in what's happening in the RMG industry and what happens along supply chains. By the way, the supplier finance also has given us quite a lot of insight on how ordering is working, what impact the crisis had, and how the different parties in the value chain have been acting, specifically the manufacturers and the brands. So with that, I would like to get to the topic of global and changing global supply chains. So when we're looking at the RMG sector, we have a supply chain that comes from the commodities through the textile space, apparel, to the distribution. So all the trends that we're talking about can be looked at in different parts of the supply chain. And I think what I always tell everyone who's working with me, you got to be specific of what we're talking about. Many times what we're talking about when we're speaking about the impact of the RMG sector, we're mainly in the apparel space, assembly and apparel production. And the branding, end of use, retail, wholesale is what is also in a major way affected. And there's a separation in global supply chains between the apparel and the distribution side. However, we have a very large textile space and we also have a commodity space. And I think if we want to influence the way of how these value chains work, I think we got to look into every single part of it. So what are the trends? These are trends that are pre-COVID, and these are trends that through COVID have been reinforced. So first, we have shifting power structures in these value chains. So there are global brands. We have e-commerce that is increasingly more important, and we have stronger manufacturing power, specifically stronger manufacturing power if you combine the apparel and the textile space. You have shifting demand and production, and there is a tendency to and within emerging markets. There is more demand from developing countries. That is the consumption side. The production is closer to consumption. So there is a shortening of value chains. So please keep in mind that these are pre-COVID trends that already were happening. There are rising labor costs and sustainability issues in China. And there are trade tensions between China and the United States. All that affects of how the value chain, specifically in the garment sector, works. We have sustainability and transparency trends. So structure, resource efficiency, climate questions of the impact of production and also of the logistics. Transparency and traceability of how production works. So traceability specifically along the value chain and supply chain. Labor standards that are becoming increasingly important, and corporate ethics that are also important to understand of which organizations and which companies are more successful than others, and how you separate among firms. Technology and jobs, I think this is one of the most talked about trends, and I will get into this a little bit later, but automation and smart technologies and the impact of those on production and consumption. Again, I think when we speak about technology and its impact on jobs, we got to be specific of what we're talking about. I think most of the time we fear it, but it is also something to welcome because it is improving a lot of conditions and it creates new jobs. So technology and automation. So I think it was important enough to make a separate slide. So we have different impacts of technology and automation in different parts of the value chains. So what we talk about the most, and I think it's here under number 3, is the distribution and retail impact. We have empowered consumers, connected retailers, that is already highly automated. We have e-commerce, we have new retail and distribution business models, which impact the way of how clothing is being sold. In a major way, it requires new jobs and new skill sets. When it comes into the early stages, I jump to number 1, which are the commodity-based parts of the value chains. They have already been highly automated and capital intensive. Here we have a lot of demand for sustainability, and there is a need to increase the transparency on where the materials for production are coming from. And technology and automation will allow us to get more transparency. So number 2 is the later stages in the value chain, which is the garment assembly and the apparel and the apparel factories. We see increasing trends for automation. However, it is not a full automation. Cobots is something that is a lot of talked about. It is the combination of manual labor with robots. And there are many different avenues on how to do this. And I think every company has to find the right and best combination on how to use technology in that space. But there are many opportunities to upskill and to improve labor conditions through technology. And specifically countries like India and Bangladesh do adopt new technologies, both in the hardware as well as in software, and integrate backward is, I think, an opportunity into the material production and forward, also in logistics, design, and e-commerce. We can talk about this later on when we speak about the impacts of COVID. One of the major objectives that we have in the International Finance Corporation as we're looking at the value chain in countries like Bangladesh and also somewhat in India is that we would like to increase complexity. We think that the role of complexity is very important as you go, it's economic complexity as a concept, but we would like to bring this down to the firm level. And at the firm level, we always look at what are you producing? How complex is your product? Where are you in the value chain? So is it something where you are in early stages of the value chain in the commodity where scale of production is very important? Are you in the intermediate products within the value chain? Or are you in the assembly stage? However, you are not assembling products that you have designed, but you're basically a contract manufacturer with fairly low margins. Or are you the brand itself that is basically marketing and selling the products? So where are you in the value chain is very important. And the third part we're looking at is the process technology that you're using. You can produce the same product with very different process technologies. We talked about it when we right now about the technology. You can be highly automated, and you can do this in a relatively low automation process. What separates manufacturing from other activities is scale. And I think scale is a very important differentiator. And I think we had participants in this seminar who coming from very large companies. So scale is important, especially if you speak about efficiency and productivity, and also about how, if you really are in manufacturing. So what is the disruption that has happened in this? Well, we are in a black swan event for the fashion industry. So fashion is discretionary spending. We've experienced a strong contraction of the industry, cancellation of orders, and the recovery is only slow. And it's really uncertain because we do not know the path of the pandemic, and we do not know of how consumers will react. So the main impacts are really a blow to supply in the beginning. So we had supply disruptions as the pandemic started out, and to demand. There is joblessness and financial hardship along the value chain. Many brands and retailers are hard hit and financially leading that financially, and that leads to financial distress. And we have experienced quite a few bankruptcies. Only strong brands and manufacturers are surviving, and there will be consolidation. And I think there is more focus on the interconnectedness of the industry, and it makes it really hard to plan ahead. So what are the future? So this is something that I'm looking forward to discuss in the panels to come. Going forward, there is a reinforcement of pre-existing trends. The technology is reshaping markets towards fast, agile, and resilient supply chains and shorter supply chains. Factories are going to be empowered. Transparency, good factories. Transparency is absolutely key. The importance of sustainability, environmental and social, is going to be more prominent, and corporate culture is absolutely key. There is a need to demonstrate behavior beyond compliance, with values represented in products, services, and actions. What are the opportunities? So every crisis also creates opportunities. So the demographics of consumption move from west to east. Their increasing production moves out of China. Geographically, there is diversity of supply due to political tensions. I think one thing that the crisis has brought out is that you cannot have only one production center for a lot of underlying materials and products that go into final products. I think the crisis has really brought out that there needs to be diversification. There is an increasing regionalization of supply chains, nearshoring and onshoring. The power of good manufacturing companies is going to increase, and they're going to cover bigger parts of the value chain. Automation, digital, small-scale production. So to be more agile, to react to demand, being closer to consumers. Building of production complexity is absolutely key. Backward integration to materials, diversification of products, and increasing efficiency in production processes through automation. Production and supply chains will be digital, ethical, transparent, and sustainable. So this is a quote from Pamela Marr from the Fung Academy, Li and Fung. So thank you very much. With that, I would like to, I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and happy to participate actively.
Thank you very much, Sabine. This was a very insightful presentation. The takeaway here is the growing importance of corporate ethics, sustainability, technology, automation, new skill sets, diversification of products. And it will be interesting to see how the supply chains move as consumption shifts to the east. I would now like to introduce our moderator, Arindam Saha, Associate Director, PwC India, to take the discussion forward. Over to you, Arindam.
Summing up what I have, I'm in a position to share this e-meeting with such a stalwarts of the industry. So, but before I start, let me try to give some background of it. So, if we look at the global trade as it was standing at close to 123 billion US dollar in 2018, and EU and ES were the two major markets. No surprise that China was the major supplier to them. And the South Asia is one of the major supply base for both the markets, contributing more than 60% of the overall sourcing of the apparel. But this pandemic has created some of the changes. So when we are discussing with the global brands, what we understand that they are also not sure that how many apparel will be purchased by the customers. So let's say they were putting an order of 1 lakh pieces of garments in one go to a Bangladesh-based manufacturer, but they will hesitate. They will probably like to give it in parts, maybe 10,000 or 20,000 pieces, and in a breakup of lots. They're also saying that they will prefer to source from nearer the geographies so that they don't need to keep stock. They don't need to block their capital into the inventory because everything is uncertain. So will it bring in some change in the global supply chain, global trade? Will there be more, sourcing of apparel for the European market, maybe from Eastern Africa or maybe from Turkey or Eastern European markets probably? Will US market be more catered by the suppliers based out of Latin America or Mexico? Will we see a shift in all this operation, the capacities, whatever is there globally distributed? Well, these all are questions. And to be true that we are also seeing some of the trends already happen. So what we understand that one of the Bangladesh manufacturer, he has already shifted some of the capacities to one of the Eastern African countries, and he has also taken some of the Bangladesh-based workers also there because he was finding it difficult to work with the African workers. So with this, I would like to come to the main part of our panel discussion. So let me come directly to Mr. Ghosh, who is the Managing Director of Laguna Clothing. So Mr. Ghosh, are you also experiencing a similar kind of changes in the global trade flow? Are you experiencing any such shift which have the potential?
So one thing is clear, as mentioned, people who are customers, companies who are more digital are gaining market share. There is a very strong anti-China sentiment politically, especially that is forcing a lot of American companies to look at other sourcing opportunities. And since the cry is for something as fundamental as the source of cotton, so people are therefore looking at countries where there is a complete value chain. And India is one of the few countries which have a complete value chain. I mean, to summarize, I think we are still in the middle of the transition. We do not know when the pandemic will end. We have, people giving predictions almost every morning on television. We do not know how much staying power many of our customers and companies have. So, how many will be able to manage to sustain themselves through the journey? So, given all these uncertainties, one is just taking one day at a time.
Sure.
I think more than predicting what the outcome will be, as an operating manager, would try to grab the opportunity. So there is a disruption, and therefore, the stakes are open. So it's a question of figuring out what works in the new normal and then trying to reconfigure oneself to do so. One thing is very clear, like in many other industries, there will be a fundamental digital transformation of our industry. We will not have the traditional slow way of working. Already, because of the pandemic, we have had, we have invested in 3D software like Browseware and Flow. We have dramatically cut down the speed to market with some of our key customers by stopping a lot of physical product development. Okay, so we can see the urgency which is happening because of all these environmental changes as we speak. And so we see a huge acceleration, and companies which are nimble enough to take these opportunities will succeed. One very important point made is people are looking for companies with more transparency. They do not want to know that the cotton is being produced by forced labor or by some unethical means. They would like to work with larger groups because they don't have to work with too many people and in a very fragmented supply chain. So these are the things which are going for us. We have to seize the opportunity and take it forward.
Right. Mr. Ghosh, I will just ask you another question. So as you very rightly touched upon the China, factor, and yes, we can observe that there was already a dip in the export of apparel from China even before pandemic, because there was a shift happening internally. They wanted to move towards more value-added products, but now that dip is very sharp. So, if you look at the global perspective, whom do you think that will take up that vacuum which China is creating? Who has a higher chance?
No, I think India has a very good chance because of the fact that, all said and done, while we have not grown in terms of garmenting capacity in the manner in which Bangladesh and Vietnam has, we do not have, duty-free access to important markets like America, like the USA and EU. But the fact remains is that we are vertical and we have a very large population. So if we can play the cards well, people would definitely look at us strategically. And we have companies like Polo Ralph Lauren, which have traditionally been very China focused. And today, simply because of the statements which are being made in the USA, they have very, very consciously decided to take steps to come to India and invest more in India. So, while there will be certainly in the short term a mismatch between our capability and obviously what China has built up, so it's not going to be an easy task for companies to innovate and give the same level of capability as the Chinese have built up. The very fact that the window is opening should give a very big impetus to people here. And there is a very, very good opportunity for India to take share, which it has not been for many, many years.
Thank you, Mr. Ghosh. So with that, let me come to Sumit. He is a senior operation officer with IFC, has great amount of understanding of the textile and apparel trade globally, and to be specific, in Bangladesh. So he has studied the R&D sector of Bangladesh in great detail. So Sumit, coming back to you, in your thought process, what is the present level of competitiveness of the R&D sector of Bangladesh? And also the second part of the question is that how do you think that the competitiveness will get impacted by the EU-Vietnam FTA and also the country's potential upgradation from the present LDC status within probably next 5 years? Over to you, Sumit.
Thank you, Arindam. So I think just as you mentioned, I should note that ISC has been working in Bangladesh with the RMG sector for roughly about 8 to 10 years. And as Sabine mentioned, we have a wide suite of products that are under implementation, including investment and advisory. So last year, about 2 years ago, we undertook a study of the Bangladesh RMG sector competitiveness. And this was driven partly by the idea that there were many trends that were beginning to influence the sector, and Bangladesh had the ambition of achieving $50 billion target by the year 2021. So we wanted to see how competitive Bangladesh was in that context to be able to realistically achieve that goal and what the challenges were. So we undertook a competitiveness study and an analysis of the sector. And I have to say that some of what came back from the findings surprised us a little bit as well, because we are now talking about the pre-COVID days when it was a well understood fact that Bangladesh was a strong performer, was the second largest apparel manufacturer, and had everything to gain from any transition or diversification that would happen away from China. But I think as we looked at it and we looked at some of the enabling factors for Bangladesh to achieve those goals, it looked like it was already a little bit at risk. So we worked very closely with BGMEA, which is the business association in Bangladesh. And we became to, as we started working with the private sector and looking at some of the key factors for increased competitiveness, we realized that Bangladesh had key gaps that made it very vulnerable. And the $50 billion goal, even 2 years ago, was predicated on the market economics that were prevalent before the time, but it was not very forward-looking. And so some of the trends that Sabine actually presented in her key trends were key factors that actually led to or the absence of Bangladesh adjusting to those trends led to their weaknesses. So just for example, one of the key challenges that Bangladesh faces is its concentration of its exports, not only geographically, but also in terms of its products. And then when you look at its products, it's focused mostly on cotton products. And we know that the global trend has shifted more towards man-made fibers. And I think as Mr. Ghosh also mentioned, with COVID now, with the trend increasingly moving towards athleisure, etc., Bangladesh is simply not ready for this. There isn't enough MMF in Bangladesh. The backward chain integration is also missing. So overall, what we found is that the absence of FDI, low productivity in Bangladesh in the factories. It was, I think, the lowest, if I remember correctly, compared to all of Asia. And the low level of technology acceptance in the factories, sustainability. Although you find that Bangladesh is very progressive on the sustainability agenda, you find large corporations that are very progressive, are top-notch, but then by and large at a sector, the sector is lagging behind on the sustainability agenda as well. As was mentioned also by the previous speaker, Mr. Ghosh, regarding vertical integration, Bangladesh simply doesn't have it. It's focused so much of its efforts on low margin, high volume production of apparel that it has overlooked the opportunities in the value chain, right? And I think that's an important aspect to understand. Now, I mean, we can talk about many of these points at length, but I think the important thing is to note that even before COVID, Bangladesh wasn't ready and had vulnerabilities in its value chain and in the sector that would have exposed it to even small external shocks, let alone a shock like COVID. And what COVID has done is simply amplified those. And the trends that we've talked about, that Sabine has also mentioned, have only been amplified further and have become more real for Bangladesh. So where Bangladesh stands today, as a matter of fact, is that in a recent report that I read just 2 days ago, according to WTO, Bangladesh has already lost its second position, right, to Vietnam. As of at least the first half of this year, Vietnam has more exports, about 13 billion or so, whereas Bangladesh is 11, and which basically puts its position as the second largest manufacturer at risk. And so this is going to continue for Bangladesh. This risk is with especially the Vietnam and EU free trade agreement now, and the potential loss of the duty-free access to EU. These are huge risks for Bangladesh, which will require just a lot of leadership, commitment, and coordination between the stakeholders to ensure that it can keep pace and try to upgrade its production and meet the needs of the new, the post-COVID world, right? So we actually have a program that we're developing in Bangladesh now, trying to look at how they can address, the sector in a recovery phase, and where the sector can continue to improve its competitiveness.
Let me come to Mr. Ranjan Mathani, who is leading the business of Epic Group with 11 state-of-the-art manufacturing units in Bangladesh, Vietnam, Jordan, and Ethiopia. So, Mr. Mathani, when we are listening to all these developments and the trends, what is your opinion? Do you think that there will be a potential overcapacity of apparel manufacturing in some parts of South Asia?
First of all, thank you for having me on this panel today with all these industry veterans. It's my privilege to be participating in this event. Good evening to everybody. For me, I think I've been doing this for 40 years. I started at a very young age from scratch. So whatever I've learned is through my experience, not had the chance to study anything, but actually experience the business. So growing up in this business, I've always felt traditionally that the supply has always exceeded the demand. Always felt it was a buyer's market. What we might see is a different ball game in the future. We would have to, in these situations, be able to paint the picture to the best of our ability, and you might see emerging brands, emerging markets. You might be building in Asia for the Asian market. Today, we've seen our business diversify into so many different markets, and not traditionally USA and EU based. So really, I would say that it's not about the quantity of the capacity. It's about the quality of the capacity. What we call it in our company is smart capacity. The ability, the agility, and the nimbleness to have the right product at the right time, at the right place, and to be able to replace it with the right stuff frequently, with the new generation that is used to very rapid methods of distribution and has enormous choice. Comfort and leisure and performance being the forte versus the traditional aspect of the business. I think we are at the beginning of a shift. We're probably not seeing major repercussions. I believe we're at the beginning stage. We will see a mega consolidation. I think the kind of consolidation that the industry has not witnessed. It would take a very bold statement to be able to predict the kind of consolidation that we're going to see. And I think we have to build partnerships, and the capacities are to be dedicated to those strategic partnerships versus just building capacity.
So some of the industry analysts, what they are talking about, that if the brands, they prefer to source nearer the markets, and do you think that and they will probably prefer to source it from the same suppliers with whom they are working for the last 10 years, 15 years. In that case, do you see that there is a potential shift of the capacity? So maybe from Bangladesh or India, as because the lead time will be higher, and they can't afford that much of lead time. So can there be something like a capacity shifting from Bangladesh, India to Eastern Africa, to Latin America by the same company, so that they can cater to that brand or to the market quickly?
Well, thank you. I'll play the little devil's advocate here, if you don't mind, because I'm Indian by birth, Chinese by passport, and then Bangladesh on my CV. So I've got pretty much talk about all the three countries that I've had my experience in, and I think we'll see a major shift. I believe that this business is about people. The fashion business, the apparel business is about people. We bet on Bangladesh, back in '83 we went there, when it was a scary place to go. And because we believe in people, and without apparel, the people of Bangladesh would have no, I would say, other means of progression. And we believe that people are very resilient in countries like that, where they are dependent on one industry. So we see, we actually feel there'll be a shift within Asia, from China. Obviously, the big Chinese players tend to go more to Vietnam because it's easier to work within the same kind of proximity and cultures. Indian subcontinent might see more investments in India and Bangladesh. I think Eastern Africa and countries like that will probably have to slow down a little bit because of COVID, but are definitely countries for the future. Because the countries that, I mean, it's all about smart capacity, building closer to the point of retail or point of distribution, verticalities, the design prowess, the ability to replenish merchandise. I think it's not dependent on one particular pillar. I mean, if you're great sustainability and if you're platinum certified by Leeds, it's not going to get you an order.
Right.
You need to
I
have
agree.
a very balanced approach. You need to have a very balanced organization, which is constantly evolving and absorbing the environment, which is now changing at speed that human beings are not used to.
Right. Let's now move from apparel to home textile a bit. So we have with us Mr. Ajay Arora. He is the managing director of Decor. Mr. Arora, till now we have heard about the apparel supply chain and how that can get impacted. We would like to understand from you that how the global supply chain of home textile is different from the apparel one, and how do you see the changes will happen in the supply chain in the coming time?
So thank you for having me, and pleasure to be part of this esteemed panel. I'll say that home is a big beneficiary of this pandemic. Fortunately, people are emphasizing their home much more. So that is the biggest difference, I think, that is there in the COVID time. As far as the supply chain is concerned, the home industry still has a significant business in custom made as against ready-made. So obviously it is shifting more and more towards ready-made as standardization is developing even within homes. But the custom-made business still remains a significant part of the business. The biggest difference in the value chain in home is in upholstery compared to apparel. So you jump outside the textile industry into another manufacturing industry before you jump into the consumer's home. So that is the biggest difference if you really are asking me about the difference. But if you ask me about changes during COVID times, I'll say there's a lot that is common. Of course, we don't see Vietnam or Bangladesh playing that big a part as they do in apparel. We see Turkey and India and China as the three main sources, Pakistan, of course, as well. So 4 countries, are the important, I would say, suppliers or into this place. I feel the big shift is digital. I think that's a very big shift that we are seeing. And I think the digital has got 6 different aspects. One aspect is definitely e-commerce. Another aspect is definitely how do you digitize your product? How do you ensure that your product can be imagined by the buyer, applied into his home? So rendering is becoming much, much more important. How do you really ensure that the ability to digitize is such that physical becomes secondary? So you can shortlist digitally, search digitally, influence digitally, and then back it up with a sample, if you like. The exchange of information needs to get much more digital. And I think that needs to go right across the value chain, and that's easier said than done.
Yes.
A lot of people spoke about agility and speed and proximity to market and being able to have the right product replenish. But in order to do that, it's the exchange of data and automating the actioning of that data that needs to be really executed at every piece in the chain. So the more human intervention, the more friction, the more delay, the more chance that people are wasting time making decisions that algorithms could easily make. As the textile business or the home textile business, profit lies in differentiation. Profit lies in managing complexity. So I think, my own experience is more on playing in a space which is design differentiated, which is more about quality, service, and design rather than price, capacity, and volume. So I won't respond to trying to be the most efficient manufacturer, because my own thinking has always been that in a global market, efficiency of cost is more in the hands of exchange rates and trade relationships than in the hands of firms. So I think it's more what you can't control that determines your future. Hence, I decided never to play in that space, but that's my own personal call. I think there are other people who have different strategies, and I have no real desire to criticize that. But since it's a design differentiated place where you're trying to win profit, you are only winning profit in textiles, which is, I would say, continuously suffers from poor IP, intellectual property right protection. And hence competitors are quickly able to, even customers are quickly able to unravel where profit is hidden and shift it out by auctioning it again to other suppliers. Because of that, it's extremely important that there's a speed in the exchange of information as to what is selling well. But that speed is only achieved, like I said earlier, by eliminating any obstruction of human beings unnecessarily playing a part on requisitions, production plan, on approvals, on credit limits, on being able to decide whether the goods should go by air or by sea. I think every place in the value chain, the decision-making needs to get more and more automated if you want to run a shorter supply chain. I don't think I'm very optimistic about a huge shift in where goods will get produced. I think especially sitting in India, having the ability today to hire a textile engineer who is fresh out of college or a NIFT or a NIT graduate for no more than $5,000 per annum, I think there's tremendous scope for a higher level arbitrage than just obsessing on having the cheapest stitching wage cost in the world. So I think the play for India, I would always hope, is about hiring MBAs, chartered accountants, designers, and we've got English-speaking, very well-educated people, bright, hardworking, and I hope that India can try to capture this opportunity, which is coming from the shift away from China, by grabbing a higher market share in the profitable part of the business. And then, right. And the last thing I think that the COVID is, kind of revealing is the strategic strength of firms. And I think all organizations, after getting this kind of shock, need to look at, what is the resilience inside the company. And people who are too dependent on a few customers, people who are too dependent on a few products, or people who are too dependent on just playing on price, right. Or will need to wake up now and think about building a more resilient business. And that is a very important part that textile needs to do. I think in India, the whole textile industry suffers from a huge working capital, a huge fixed asset, and a huge labor investment. And these three all in return for a low margin. That is right. That's a very poor report card for the industry. And I'm very happy to hear, very encouraged to hear that the manufacturer power will emerge. I think I'll talk about the last two digital pieces, which is being able to reach the consumer with less intervention. So brands are going to be extremely important. I think the future is all about the fight with e-commerce brands and your own brand, and being able to ensure that you have enough pull onto your digital platforms rather than surrendering a lot of margin and discount on third-party e-commerce platforms. And I think the other piece is digital manufacturing. And the digital manufacturing, technologies like digital printing, these kind of technologies, which can create a lot of complex product, design differentiated product without really going through a lot of work centers, without creating a lot of complexity in the back end, need to be leveraged much more. And one should stay away from unnecessary complexity in manufacturing. And organizations should strategize their product offering according to what can make money for them by going direct, by risking a little bit, and disintermediating, all the power that lies with few large retailers. I think the future of the textile industry lies in this power struggle, and it is very important that you become much more powerful if you really want to get a return on your effort.
I think some of the common threads which we are getting from the responses, one is the technology will be really, really powerful, the way you say it, and other people have also said. It's about value addition. It's no more only the cost things, and also how you can declutter the complexities. So till now, we have heard mainly from the finished product manufacturers. So let me now move to the raw material side. So we have with us really a stalwart of Indian textile industry, Mr. R.D. Udeshi, the president of polyester division in Reliance Industries. So, sir, as we were hearing from Sumit as well a few minutes back, that man-made fiber that will become more important. It is already gaining its market share, and it will keep on gaining it more. But still, India, Bangladesh are cotton focused. If we look at our export basket. So what do you think the main reason why we are not aligning our export basket with the global sourcing pattern? Over to you, Mr. Udeshi.
Thank you, Anindra. I think all of us, we know that total fiber production stroke consumption globally is around 100 million tons, out of which roughly 25 million ton is on cotton, whereas balance is in synthetic fiber. That the cotton production globally has remained stagnant, 25 million ton plus minus 1 or 2 million ton here and there, depending upon the crop condition. In India, we are producing almost 6 million tons of cotton. Now, when you say 6 million tons of cotton out of 25 million tons of global production, India contributes almost 25% plus of cotton production. Now, if India needs to go beyond what it is today producing textile, if India is producing $142 billion of textile, and vision of Prime Minister of India is to go to $350 billion, I think India would need another 15 million tons of all fibers. So the entire incremental fiber required to meet the requirement of the textile industry will have to come from synthetic. I think government realizes this, and I think gradually they have started reducing the excise duty, and today we are blessed. India is blessed with all raw material as compared to Bangladesh or as compared to Vietnam or including as compared to China. I think India has self-sufficiency in cotton. Indian has a large refinery base, so we do produce large quantity of petrochemical. We have xylene, we have paraxylene, we have PTA, we have monoethylene glycol, we have large polyester plant. So I think India is now fully equipped to supply this incremental synthetic product which is required for the textile industry. I think today China continues to import paraxylene, which is the raw material for PTA. China continues to import monoethylene glycol to the tune of 8 to 9 million ton per year to meet the polyester requirement. Whereas we in India are self-sufficient as far as the refining products are concerned, as far as the petrochemical products are concerned, as far as the polyester products are concerned. I think India just needs to energize themselves to produce synthetic and become one of the major source of supply in the global market. I think we are inching towards it. I am sure that happening in the region, Indian man-made fiber consumption, particularly polyester, has been growing almost at the rate of 5 to 6% per year, whereas cotton consumption has remained by and large stagnant. I think Bangladesh has also a similar issue because I think they are more on a cotton-based textile, and they do not have that many synthetic units to support the textile industry. So I think that is one of the reasons why India and Bangladesh, and including Pakistan, are the major supplier of the cotton-based textile industry. I mean, this is a sweet and a short answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Udeshi. As I'm taking the link from you that India is blessed with both the natural fibers and also the man-made fibers. With that clue, let me come to Dr. Siddharth Rajagopal, who is the Executive Director of the Cotton Textile Export Promotion Council. So, Dr. Rajagopal, India and Bangladesh, as we were discussing right now, they are champion of cotton products for long. But recently, we could see that even in some of the product categories, there is also a slip, and there are also chances of more value additions. So, how do you see that India and Bangladesh can leverage their strength in cotton further? Over to you.
Well, I think it's a good question. I think you heard Mr. Udeshi. Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, in South Asia are still the custodians of the cotton textile industry in a way, because we are surplus in cotton in this country, and we are for various reasons. Unlike China, which is deficient, even Bangladesh, Pakistan also has a small crop. But then, yes, we are bestowed with cotton. Now, India, Bangladesh are part of a certain common South Asian region where we find that it's the largest market for cotton yarn from India at the moment. It's also the largest market for cotton fabrics from India. And Bangladesh, as you know, has emerged as a very big powerhouse of garments for various reasons. And it's quite rightly pointed out that in cotton product lines, Bangladesh has really made a name for itself in the garment area. Now, how do we go forward? Well, I think the region, as you know, has not been able to leverage its advantages for various obvious reasons. South Asia as a region, unfortunately, could have done better than what it's doing. There is no intra-regional trade is less than 5%. We have various issues here. We have the countries which have, of course, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan are basically with access to ports. So therefore, the influence of other countries like China are in a way dominant, apart from the strategic issues which come to play. But going forward, since these are neighbors and there is a huge industry or garment industry, which and garmenting, as you know, is about 80% of the economic activity of Bangladesh in terms of the economy itself. So therefore, there is no option but to sort of, help each other. Now, as far as I can see, there are issues with Bangladesh. It's an asymmetrical economy, as you know. Regional connectivity has been a big issue, as you've seen, because we've got this problems of the transportation. Of course, that is being resolved, but again, there are issues there. A lot of brands are supporting with the Bangladeshis, as you know, and a lot of goods are coming in. Duty-free access has been given by India to Bangladesh, so therefore there has been an issue there as well. There are also issues of what is called para-tariffs, tariffs, and on top of it some more tariffs, and we find that access to some of our ethnic wear, for instance, faces steep tariff in Bangladesh. I mean, that's one bone of contention that you find when you talk to people who would like to restrict imports from Bangladesh into India, and the fact that it's affecting the Indian domestic industry. At the same time, India has if you see this data, Bangladesh exports to India is about 1% of their total exports. I mean, if you take India ranks 19 in terms of the countries, but if you take EU as one number and US and others, we are about an 8th or the 9th country. Of course, it's a different point that Bangladesh has issued a statement India will be or become its 3rd largest market. That's an ambition that they have, which is fair. I mean, but we are sitting on a lot of cotton textile, and there have been issues, and we would like to see it move forward. At the moment, yes, India is supplying cotton, But as it happens in all these economies, there is always a fear that you should be a little more self-reliant. So Bangladesh started its spinning, and it also started seeing whether it can procure its cotton. It's also tried its hand at growing cotton, but it didn't work out. But we have to really iron out these differences. And to my mind, and as Mr. Udeshi also pointed out, South Asia will be a bastion for cotton textile production. And that's something which we should feel quite honored about, in fact, and notwithstanding the onslaught of the man-made fiber, polyesters, and the viscoses of the world. It's a sustainable fiber. Cotton continues to have its allure, and it is accepted as a dominant product line for the textile industry. So in my view, we need to look forward to, despite all these problems which you find, which are going to be there, because now, for instance, China has given duty-free access to Bangladesh. So in a way, it creates further competition. And therefore, you see, you have an arrangement here where they are able to access the goods at a reasonable rate, and maybe they've got efficiencies, even though our friend pointed out that there are difficulties in Bangladesh itself of converting the goods into garments, and the industry itself is going through some pressure and having problems. But having said all that, there is, looking forward, we need to see that there should be good development of business prospects with Bangladesh. Yes, and they have to synergize their interests, and which they are doing. I mean, we are offering cotton on a G2G platform to them at the last, because we are sitting on a huge pile of cotton. That cotton needs to be consumed. That is being consumed here. At the same time, we have the projects which are coming in. So therefore, I would believe that, yes, we will paper over these issues, and they have to support each other as the industries, the textile industry.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rajagopal. Thanks for sharing your views. Let me quickly come to some of the factors of competitiveness now. So I will first pick up infrastructure as the factor of competitiveness. And let me come back to Sumit on discussing on that. Sumit, almost every country has experimented with the industrial park concept, but they have received a very mixed kind of results. My question to you is that, do you believe that countries like India and Bangladesh can improve their competitiveness by developing large-scale textile parks? Just as a background, let me also comment that Ministry of Textiles, Government of India have also announced that they are planning for 10 mega textile park. So with that background, I just want to understand from Sumit, from his global understanding, that how do you believe that in textile parks can improve the competitiveness? Sumit?
Thank you, Rindam. Thank you. So Rindam, that's a very interesting and a relevant question, but at the same time, a very complicated question, which can take days and weeks to answer, because this is a very complicated subject. The industrial infrastructure, such as special economic zones or textile parks, are a complex undertaking that require a lot of coordination and a lot of capacity to implement. But let me take a step back and actually clarify two things. One is that you mentioned the term industrial parks. I just want to make a quick distinction between the fact that industrial parks are from the perspective of our work is quite simply a zoned piece of land that has been allocated for industrial activity, right? There is nothing special about it other than the fact that it's a serviced piece of land. Now, where I'd like to make the distinction, especially when you talk about the mixed results and the failures of industrial parks, is that these are very complex undertakings which are not just simply access to service land, but come with a package of special, for lack of a better word, let me say incentives. But actually they could be as simple as simplifying processes and procedures related to exporting and importing, registration of businesses, and so on and so forth, right? And so when you create a piece of industrial infrastructure that has these special benefits or reform-oriented package that's attached to it, that's more like a special economic zone framework. That's so what I think you're talking about when you say textile park is within the context of special economic zones for me. Now, they have a mixed record, it's true. But before I talk about that, I should also say that special economic zones are, in fact, simply a policy tool. They're not going to solve problems unless you don't have a policy, a strategy that's guiding the policy, and an objective that you want to achieve. So then where do these special economic zones play a role? So what will happen normally is that if you have a complex set of market failures related to the business environment, let's say, they can be large. It can also be in terms of linkages or access to materials, trade logistics, etc., where you cannot address these reforms at a national level because of the complexity of the agenda and the time it takes to reform these policy issues. You can create a special legislative framework within this enclave. The idea is not to create these enclaves as long-term enclaves, but to actually pilot and initiate these reforms within these space, right? So that's essentially what it is. So ultimately, it depends on what the vision of the government is and what it wants to achieve in its industrial policy. So now when you talk about textile parks, it's first and foremost very important that the governments understand the value chain, right? It's not just the governments, but of course all the key stakeholders, that they understand the value chain, they understand the trends, they understand the complexity of being part of this value chain, and then trying to create the kind of structure or infrastructure that's needed to support that. So with respect to textile parks, if India and Bangladesh want to pursue those, first and foremost, it's important to understand where is the demand, right? Like, this needs to be based on demand. This is not a supply agenda. The government of India or government of Bangladesh should not be saying that we're going to launch another 100 industrial parks that are textile sector specific, right? There has to be some demand driving those numbers to say what the scale of these operations will be and how quickly they will scale them up. The other thing is trying to understand the value chain to allow, for example, we've talked about the vertical integration aspect, but more broadly the ecosystem, whether it's about accessing cotton, whether it's about accessing polyester or whatever other fibers that there may be, and how do you ensure that the businesses inside these zones can access the kind of input materials they need, the kind of services they need in real time, so that they are not impacted, because every single cost item matters, right? Also in this regard, trade logistics is important. So one of the most important things and the reasons why zones tend to fail is because these become political decisions, and they are often situated in locations that are not appropriate for launching businesses, right? So access to labor is difficult. There's no social infrastructure around it. Either access to electricity or water is a challenge, or there are issues around access to land because it is contested. There is settlements on the land, and when these things come in the middle of these agendas, then they become really complicated and difficult to implement. So two things basically is what I would say. One is to understand demand. If the countries want to launch these textile parks, like what is the real demand and what does the sector really need, and to create conducive policies to support that ecosystem, both on the services side, on the input material side, and also the transportation logistics side, and labor, of course, as well. And then the second thing is sustainability and compliance. We've talked about it in many ways in the textile sector. I think this is going to be the single largest issue that is going to determine the success of corporations going forward. And companies are looking for places where they can do their business, which allows them to be compatible, which allows them to be sustainable. And this is about labor, water, energy, circularity, which is an emerging concept as well. R&D could be a part of it as well, but basically supporting the sustainability agenda. The other thing I would say is the importance of not focusing so much on incentives and subsidies that can be distortive, but to focus on policies that can improve the efficiency of the businesses and facilitate their work that they're doing in that segment or in the value chain, wherever that may be. So we can go on this discussion as well, but I'll stop here. If you have more questions, I'm happy to answer.
No, thank you, Sumit. I think you have explained it very nicely, and you also touched upon the point of R&D, which again I believe one of the major factors of competitiveness, and probably India, Bangladesh, to be specific, we are probably lacking. So let me go back to Mr. Udeshi. Mr. Udeshi, quality is a big factor, and of course, we need to keep on innovate to keep a match with the quality definition, because the definition keeps on changing. So, but unfortunately, if I look at the manufacturers of this Indian subcontinent, there is very little investment in, if I can say, real R&D work. So how do you think that these innovation things impacts the competitiveness of the country? If you can comment, Mr. Udeshi.
I think Indian subcontinent has been also now looking into R&D facility within India. It is a beginning, but still long way to go. I think we have 8 center of excellence put by Government of India, and especially for technical textile. I think we are saying that the technical textile is a sunrise industry, and which will contribute almost like 25 to 30% of the overall textile industry. And India is still hardly 5 to 10% of the total textile production, which is a part of the technical textile. So India will become in a forefront for technical textile. I think another issue which I saw, I think world is looking for a sustainable garment. When I say sustainable garment, means garment produced out of the recycled raw material. I think I'm proud to say, I think India has done a lot of work, and today the manufacturing of PET bottles, almost 85 to 87% of the bottles are recycled and converted into staple fiber, which is converted into fabric, knitted fabric, and then it goes to all brand guys. Because the brand people also, they are looking for 50% of their garments coming out of the sustainable product. So I think India has done a great work compared to European country and the Western country, which is hardly converting today 30 to 35% of the bottles. So I think this is one achievement what India has. I think the second achievement I saw that adaptability by the Indian industry. I think this is a great asset what we saw. All of us, we know that India used to import, I think in the beginning of the COVID, India used to import the large quantity of PPE suits. Today, India produces almost 500,000 PPE suits on a daily basis, and now government is looking forward to export these PPE suits to the Western country. So India, rather than producing only a typical RMG, which are conventional, I think they adapted to the new product line, and PPE suits became the new product line. And we saw in the first last 15 days or 20 days, almost 5 million PPE suits have been exported by the Indian industry. So there are around 600 industries which are producing these PPE suits. The another classic case was production of swab. You know, the swab is required for the testing purpose, and India used to import swabs from China at the rate of almost 18 rupees a swab, and without swab you cannot conduct the test.
Right.
We were given opportunity and given a challenge between Reliance and J&J that we want this swab to be produced in next few days. I'm quite happy to tell you that from the conceptual stage to the production and commercial production, these swabs were produced on the 8th day, duly approved by the laboratory, and today India is the net exporter of swab to the global market. So Indian industry is adapting to the new environment, and I am sure that they will become one of the major source and a major force in a global market. The shift in R&D capabilities is actually slow in this part of the region. I think purely because mainly RMG was reserved for small scale industry by a government in the earlier period for various reasons. Now they open up this industry open for all kind of industry. So India is now becoming, and people are spending money on fashion designing, and I think the time to come that will become the new way of life, and this fashion designing, change of fashion, and producing the garments made out of the new fashion which meets the international requirement. I think that is the new life what we see for Indian industry. So I am.
So let me come to Mr. Arora. So D-Decor is a, we feel very proud of when we see the brand D-Decor. So do you have any plan to go global with this brand? And my second part of this question is, what are the challenges of taking successful Indian brand to the rest of the world? Over to you, Mr. Arora.
So I think, the biggest challenge of taking a brand global is first to get distribution relationships to agree to put your product on the shelf. The whole challenge of starting from scratch and getting a brand into the mind of the consumer is to balance the availability of the right product in a sufficient penetration to reach the scale to be able to make the investment, which is very significant, in branding. As far as we are concerned, where we stand today, and especially with the onset of COVID and the digital impact, we are strategically debating whether we want to do it organically, inorganically, or through digital marketing. Our own experience with digital marketing is humble in our own markets. So we are improving that experience locally to be able to learn how to drive more business, more B2C business without any intermediary at all, and to make your brand more salient in front of the consumer, whether he is digitally influenced or whether he's buying digitally. And also, we're waiting post-COVID to see if there are any opportunities to acquire a brand, because then it becomes a simpler journey to introduce your brand into the channel that you acquire. So you may acquire a brand which is well penetrated, well recognized, yet not so profitable at a viable pricing. That is the opportunity we're looking for. And we do hope that the COVID presents us with such a moment and we can make a move, post the end of this year.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Arora.
Thank you.
So let me now move to Dr. Dasgupta. He has vast experience of advising both government and private sector for boosting exports. So, Dr. Dasgupta, come to you. What can be the approach of South Asia for strengthening its position in textile and apparel trade using bilateral and regional trade agreements?
As far as regional and bilateral agreements are concerned, Bangladesh is soon to move out of the ranks of LDCs, and it is on account of being an LDC that it enjoys zero duty access to the European Union. The Vietnamese have already gained zero duty access to the European Union, and we have a duty drawback or a handicap, you can say, of about 9.2% in Europe. Now, Bangladesh in about 3 years' time will probably become a developing country. And then it remains to be seen whether the European Union will immediately withdraw its zero duty access to Bangladesh, or it will continue to do so. So there are these challenges in the regional agreements. And as far as India is concerned, the bilateral trade and investment agreement, which has been under negotiation with the EU since 2007, I don't see in the present atmosphere that we are going to go ahead and seal this deal within the next year or 2 years or so. So that is as far as the European Union is concerned. In the case of the US, the US in all its trade agreements has been asking for fabric forward, yarn forward used to be the earlier thing which they used to put in the NAFTA, for instance, in 1992. So it is unlikely that we will have an FTA with the US also in the near future. That takes us to the ASEAN region and RCEP. RCEP, I think, from all the indications that we have had in the past 7-8 months, it is perhaps a closed chapter. So ASEAN, there is now talk going on about reassessing our agreement with the ASEAN as to whether they have gained much more and we have really not gained much. And we may review the bilateral agreement. Finally, it is the SAFTA, which is the last bilateral agreement which is of substance. Now, as you have mentioned, and I think Siddharth has also mentioned this, there are rumblings of discontent, especially in the apparel industry in India, that Bangladesh is getting free access into the Indian market. And the fabrics which are being used are not of Indian origin, but are of Chinese origin. Bilateral agreements and regional agreements will probably not help the Indian industry to gain greater market share in the major markets of the world, including the ASEAN region and whatever we have, for instance, with Japan and Korea, we already have it in terms of the SECA, and we have not been able to exploit that.
Sabine, we have received one question for you. What are the qualification criteria for an individual company to be eligible for receiving financial or other support from IFC? End of the day, it boils down to money.
I think hopefully not only to money. Hopefully we can give a lot more. I think what we hear from clients is that partnership is actually very appreciated in addition to money. And I think having a global institution is giving us many tools, as I laid out on the financing side, long-term and equity and everything in between. And on the short-term side, I think for your industry, very important is receivable financing. And we're trying to become really innovative and do purchase order financing. So to give companies access to purchase order at a much better price. So not doing it through working capital finance directly. But this is innovative, and this is unluckily the crisis came in between. So we're working on this. One thing that I see is important for companies is, we're looking very much into shifting the supply chains, into increasing complexity in production, and that does not mean more complex procedures or anything. It means that you're adding to the way of how you're producing in product, process, and value chain. This was a very interesting conversation. There were so many good proposals and ideas. I want to pick up the latest. The letter is about the deepening of the material production. I think all of your countries need a deepening in material production. I thought it was very interesting, just this example about the availability of looms and how modern the production processes are. So we would be very interested in participating in this kind of complexity expansions and seeing of how we can contribute. At the same time, we have, for smaller producers, we have a lot of advisory services, but also financing services where we are looking into how we can distribute the risks. So what I would propose, if there's interest, please approach us. We are having offices in both India and in Bangladesh, and the devil is always in the detail, and we're asking a lot of questions. But it was a fantastic conversation, and I just want to close it with one word. Industrialization, manufacturing is absolutely key. So sure, financing is enabling, infrastructure is enabling, industrial parks are enabling, policy are enabling. But the focus has to be on production and how to become more relevant and productive. So there is a lot to be done, and there are many opportunities for countries like India and Bangladesh. The circularity we talked about with from Reliance Industries, I would like to bring a challenge out. It's not only about PET bottle and downcycling, because it is downcycling. let's be also very clear, of PET. The issue is in collection of the bottles, but it's also what do you do with the used clothing? And I think that's a challenge.
Right.
And everything that's a challenge is an opportunity. But this is just one very narrow aspect. So when it comes to financing or advisory services, I would really encourage to look into our websites and also approach us. We're very interested in working with you, and we have many different tools at hand. So thank you very much.
I will come to Dr. Raja Gopal quickly. Sir, you have been part of, you have represented industry in many negotiation of free trade agreements or different trade agreements. So two trade agreements towards which our industry is looking forward to. And the first one is definitely the EU free trade agreement. And we are also hearing that potential trade agreement with USA. As you are you know the situations there. So what is your view? How close are we, or isn't there any chance?
Thank you very much. I think you see the expectations, as you know, on the EU agreement has been there for a long time. And the obvious reason is that we are suffering a duty disadvantage which our neighbors are enjoying, whether it means Bangladesh or Pakistan, or even to some extent Sri Lanka. So the South Asia, except India, seems to have an access into the European Union, which is a large market. Now, Vietnam has got into a EU agreement. So therefore, Vietnam is another chapter which has been added. And the whole point is that the duties are coming in, and it's a 9.2% advantage. And with the WTO almost collapsed, so there is no forum at the multilateral level where you could possibly go and argue a case and look at duties coming down over a period of time across the world. That is also not there. So then we are left with, as Mr. Jayan Das Gupta pointed out, with a bilateral arrangement or a regional arrangement. Now, the regional arrangement, the EU one is going on for a long time. A lot of discussion has taken place. It has been revived. Obviously, one thing we should always never forget, that in all these regional agreements, there is a give and take. While we are looking forward to taking something, there will be something we'll have to give up. And this I would tell you because in many other countries, like in Bangladesh, others have it, but they have taken social compliances, environmental compliances as part of a trade policy. So, when you mix up issues which are not really related to trade policy, you are willing to take that. That has happened in Vietnam, and the US-Korea agreement, if you see, it is there as well. So therefore, when you look at this, so as far as the EU is concerned, notwithstanding anything, we are all looking forward to it. But when it will happen, I really don't know, because that side also has concerns. And on textiles, obviously, there is nobody has a concern. We are 0 for 0. We are willing to offer here, they are willing to take there. But then obviously, it is a package. So obviously, there are issues on other sectors which are trying to be ironed out. But similarly, you'll have a situation with Britain, when it gets out of Brexit. That's a very attractive proposition as well. Because Britain, as you know, in EU, the largest market for us is UK in our textile basket. So therefore, UK is an attractive proposition. But then how it pans out, one doesn't really know. And as Mr. Das Gupta pointed out, Bangladesh has got about 2 years of LDC, and it might take year and a half, I don't know when. But if it happens, when it happens, it's a good thing for us. But it's a big question mark on when it will happen. This is as far as EU is concerned. US is a slightly different cup of tea. As I would echo what Mr. Das Gupta said, but US, if you see, has in South Asia, it doesn't have any agreement. If you go to Southeast Asia, ASEAN, it has only with Korea. It has maybe with Japan, but those are strategic. But there is a military angle to all that. It has a lot of agreements with South America, CAFTA, NAFTA, and then you could name quite a few of them. And they are part of a strategic regime again, because they are part of the Americas. So with due respects to everybody, India, India, US agreement is a distant possibility. Because we had a GSP arrangement with them. That is the farthest they went with us. After the quotas went away, the GSP benefit we were getting for a certain sector of products, and they were largely handloom products. No item of commercial significance got a duty disadvantage, because the US system is very clear on that. And if the US system comes in and we get into a PTA or a regular FTA, you will have a lot of issues which if you just examine the US-Korea agreement, you will realize the kind of responsibility that will be cast upon you before you get anywhere near a concessional duty arrangement or a duty-free arrangement with the United States. So that is where it is, in my own view, that is a very distant possibility, if at all takes place. So that's where we are as I see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ghosh, I will, last question to you. When we are looking at the apparel industry, apparel trade as a whole, and as we are understanding, there are many uncertainties. So it is not only money that is at stake, it is also many human lives, because there are so many people and so many families are accustomed to. So how as a company you are planning to, the risk mitigation strategy, because many of the countries are also have started taking the protective measures that they are trying to protect their own industry, their own market, which may act against the international trade flow, which was happening earlier. So with this background, how do you think that it's not about your company, but as an industry, we should keep a risk mitigation strategy?
We all know that this industry can bring a lot of employment, especially among the poor. And that is one segment which is very badly affected. We saw during the migrant crisis. So we have, as a company, always built our factories in rural areas so that we can create a sustainable livelihood, and we reverse migration to cities. We also find that the eastern parts of our country, like Bihar, Jharkhand, UP, these are the places which are far underdeveloped as compared to, let's say, the western or some parts of the southern parts. And here there is a very big opportunity to create this business, because the factors of production are there. There is a desperate need for jobs. Without getting FTA or without getting benefits, we have such a large pool of unemployed labor in some parts of our country. If we can manage that game well, we can certainly create a very competitive and a growing business. Everything else, whether we have gaps in our supply chain or gaps in our quality or gaps in scale, I feel all of that will align once we play the right strategic moves and connect the larger purpose of why industry has to be developed in a country with the purpose of organizations such as ourselves, government organizations, and all other stakeholders. I think there's a magic which can happen when this things, and it's just that we have not been able to create something which many other countries have been able to do relatively easily.
Thank you. I think there was a lot of positivity in today's panel discussion from the response. As I mentioned, that we have received many interesting questions from the industry. So may I request Rina ma'am to join back and start putting the first question to the panel, to whomsoever it was sent. Rina ma'am, over to you.
We have a question for Dr. Rajagopal from Prabhu Damodaran, ITF, convener ITF. He asks, Vietnam, India, Bangladesh, all three do not have FTAs with the US, so there is a level playing field there. Why then is India unable to catch up?
I think it's an interesting, there's always this comparison between EU and US. But in US, you see, if you really look at it, I don't know how many have really looked at it. You see, in garments, well, Bangladesh and Vietnam have come up, yes, on the total part of it. But if you see chapter-wise, and we did that analysis, in fact, my office, when chapter 61, 62, and 63. Okay. Chapter 61 is knitted garments. In knitted garments, Bangladesh is number 8, we are number 5. Vietnam is number 2. You can have a look at this. In 62, which is the woven part, we are lower than Bangladesh. Bangladesh is number 3, and we are number 5. So, and if you go to 63, which is home textiles, we are number 2. And if you look at chapter 60, which is the knitted fabric, None of these people are there except maybe some Pakistan, and India, of course, is very much there. So if you take the totality of this in garment, I'll come. This is number one. Number two, and this is very important to understand, that yes, Bangladesh has got advantage in the fabric, and if you further go into it, it's the shirts and the trousers, in which they have a share which is higher than China in the US market, and they have a higher share than Vietnam. And when you look at the Vietnamese data, they have a higher share in the man-made fiber elements. So therefore, Bangladesh is doing very well in cotton, and they've got higher share in shirts and trousers in the items. And India, where is it? India has got a higher share, let's say, in jerseys, and it's got also a higher share than Bangladesh in babies' garments. So the question here is that yes, out of top 15 products you take, India, it's not as if it has a disadvantage. Certain product lines we are being obviously being pushed out by the others, but in knitwear we continue to be strong. And in knitwear, of course, the other countries, if you see above India, are the Honduras and the Guatemalas and the El Salvador, which have a duty-free access. And the only other country where we should be, of course, China on top, and maybe a little bit of Korea in the knits. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that it's in let's say a market where there is no what shall I say, tariff preference, excepting which the US has given to some places. And there you must go in product lines. So if you look at the product lines, I would strongly say that when you go into the reasons why the shirts and the trousers and the shorts, which are there in the retail format in United States, they're all made in Bangladesh. And if you see the jacket, they're all coming from Vietnam. So obviously, there is a reason to look at that. And I think we can identify that. It's with the fabric base, or it's not so much to do with the conversion cost of it, because if conversion was the cost, then I would be badly off even in knits. But in knitwear, I'm better than the Bangladeshis. So what I would try to tell you here is that I think, yes, you need to look at it, and partly it is coming also from what is called as the nominated suppliers of fabrics. We've done a detailed analysis in Vietnam. Almost 55% of that business is nominated. So you try as I may go into it, because if you see Vietnam under the Indo-ASEAN agreement, Vietnam has dropped its tariffs. In many tariffs of fabrics, we are zero. And only a few HS lines are in the sensitive and maybe restricted list. So the opportunities, yet in certain lines, I've got 8% or 6% tariff. So it's, I think, in fact, looking at all this, tariffs is one limitation, but not the only limitation, as was being pointed out earlier. In fact, I would tell you the Sri Lankans have told us that, look, the GSP benefit is there for EU, but we don't depend on that. If it's 6 to 8% difference, I'd rather make up with quality, with my speed, with my, with the product itself. So while this is fine, so I would say in United States, India is in the garment side, not doing too bad. I mean, maybe in comparison. But you come to the home textile, chapter 63. We've got 50% of the market share in the US for bed linen. We've got 40% of the market share in US for towels. We are the largest suppliers. Yes. We've got shares higher than China. Yes. We've also got a higher share in some of the other product lines in the made-up sector. So it's a question of the product. And I'll tell you what, in the Indian towels and the bed linen, we have a sizable presence. But there you are, the retailers have managed to have a arrangement with the suppliers here, and despite no tariff advantage, or everybody having similar advantage, or some advantages going to some other countries like the South American countries in United States, or Korea for that matter, but India is still able to supply. So it's a mixed bag which is there in my view. While I do agree from where Mr. Prabhu Damodaran comes, he comes from Tirupur. In knitwear, we are better than Bangladesh in the US market. So to that extent, I suppose the answer lies not necessarily in tariff preferences. The answer lies in our ability to make the product line, improve our quality, and the delivery schedule.
Thank you. And the last question for this episode, and I would like to pose it to Mr. Ghosh. So this question has come from Tanmay Antu. He is a merchandiser in Shahi Exports. And his question is, we have witnessed huge order cancellations. Orders were put on hold. Heavy discounts had to be negotiated during the pandemic situation. how has trust and commitment been impacted due to this?
No, I think we have also had the same issue, and obviously, all this strategic alliance and special partnerships, you realize the value of all these nice buzzwords are not there. When it comes to a crisis, everybody's trying to protect themselves.
Right.
We have also realized that we cannot take relationships for granted. We cannot, think that companies will do the right thing or they will when they are in trouble. So yes, we are going to be very mistrustful of each other. We will have to take steps very carefully. I mean, we, for example, have decided that unless we have credit cover or some form of insurance, we will not do a single order, however well known a company may be. We have seen companies who are well established, they are quietly putting into insolvency their Canada operation or their Austrian operation, which is a very small part of their business, but that is reducing their economic problem. So yes, we in this situation, it's every company for itself. We are all trying to survive. We are all trying to grab opportunity in the new dispensation, and it is going to take a while before stability happens. The ripples in the water start. It becomes more smooth, and till then, this will continue. So there's nothing we can do about it. This is the reality.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. I think we are done with our question and answer session, both panel discussion and also the question from the industry.